happens every summer. Small turtles called diamondback terrapins skitter out of the water by JFK Airport and start moving west. They're heading for a little patch of sand where they like to lay their eggs, and they have to cross one of the airport runways to get there, runway 4L. Sometimes there are so many turtles on the move at once that the control tower has to delay flights. The press always loves doing stories about how funny this is, how a fleet of giant airplanes can be held up by a few tiny turtles. But hold that picture in your mind and think about the Caribbean Sea in 1492. There were almost 1 billion sea turtles living in it back then. Columbus's men, anchored in the Caribbean, wrote about being kept awake at night by the thwacking of so many sea turtle shells against the hull of their ships. Think about how that scene is the exact opposite of the scene at JFK. It's not a fleet of giant airplanes held up by a few tiny turtles. It's a fleet of turtles bombarding just a few tiny ships. I wrote this book about people and wild animals in America, and I found the same phenomenon underlying story after story. We all accept the version of the world we inherit as normal, no matter how much nature and how many species the generations before us watched disappear. It's really hard to zoom out and feel the changes stacking up over time. The truth is, I can't even imagine what an ocean filled with 1 billion sea turtles feels like. Last winter, I was in Hawaii, and I saw 3 sea turtles, and I flipped the fuck out. Scientists, they call this idea shifting baseline syndrome. It means we change the landscape, and as we do, the landscape changes in our imaginations also. The way we feel about certain places and certain animals shifts. Like the polar bear. Think about how quickly climate change has turned that animal's reputation from bloodthirsty man-killer to delicate, drowning victim. 200 years ago, Arctic explorers described polar bears leaping into their boats and trying to eat them, even if they set the bear on fire. But recently, when I went to the tiny northern town that calls itself the polar bear capital of the world, Martha Stewart had just arrived to film the animals for her daytime show on the Hallmark Channel. The town is called Churchill, Manitoba. It's at the edge of Hudson Bay. Every fall, right before the bay freezes over again, Churchill gets run over by about 900 polar bears and 10,000 polar bear tourists. Bears routinely wander into town. They like hanging out at the elementary school especially. Folks can call 675-BEAR and a squad of Bear Patrol officers comes out to herd the animals back up to the tundra with their trucks. Now, bears that won't budge are tranquilized and moved to a Quonset hut out by the airport. And when this so-called polar bear jail fills up, each animal is drugged again and airlifted one at a time to an area north of town. Crowds of tourists come out to watch these bear lifts, and I went to one myself. There was something just a little ceremonial about the bear lift I saw. How the uniformed wildlife officers laid the sleeping animal out in a net in the center of the scene. How they tucked each paw across its chest like some drunken uncle after Thanksgiving dinner. It was so careful, beautiful, and confusing. A couple of people cried. It was like the opposite of an animal sacrifice, this ritual to save the bear, to show how far out of our way we go not to kill it. Martha Stewart was there, filming everything. Honestly, it's a breathtaking thing to watch a polar bear flying away. sudden, the helicopter started to churn, the edges of the net lifted, and the furry shape inside folded into a U. Then, the entire package was off the ground. The chopper climbed toward a cloud bank and kept rising, the bear twirling slightly, like a tea bag underneath it. And then finally, the polar bear was gone. Airlifting polar bears. It sounds strange, but the way we help wild animals now has evolved into a surreal kind of performance art. We monitor pygmy rabbits with drones. We carry migrating salamanders across busy highways. At Cornell, scientists breeding peregrine falcons wore a specially made leather receptacle they call the copulation hat and coaxed the bird in beer can to ejaculate on their heads several times a day, every day, for much of the 1970s. See, this is just another baseline that shifts over time. These lengths we're willing to go. Each generation fights for what would have looked like lost causes to the one before it, and then the next one comes along and does just a little bit more than that. And on it goes, humanity strapping on the proverbial copulation hat, again and again. Again. Sometimes, though, even the craziest looking ideas work. Consider the story of George and Tex. In the late 1970s, there were just a handful of whooping cranes left in the wild. There was also a small number of birds at a government lab in Maryland. The scientists were doing their best to get as many offspring as they could out of those captive birds. But the lab had one problem child, a female crane named Tex. See, as a newborn, Tex had been raised in a cardboard box near a fence in a zookeeper's living room. And having never seen another whooping crane, she imprinted on the only animal she did see, the zookeeper. Basically, Tex wound up sexually attracted to people and not other birds. The scientists kept trying to pair off that Tex wasn't interested. She wanted a man. And specifically a man who looked like her old zookeeper, a dark-haired, white man with medium build. Now, there was a young crane conservationist named George Archibald, and George happened to be a dark-haired, white man with medium build. So he took Tex to rural Wisconsin, put a mattress in her pen, and moved in as Tex's companion. They'd forage together, build a nest, and they'd dance. George doing deep knee bends and springing up with his arms out like wings. He'd whoop and holler, "Come on, Tex, come on, come on, Tex, come on." And soon, they'd be dancing together, just like wild cranes do during courtship. This got Tex aroused, and at just the right moment, two assistants would rush out and inseminate her with crane seed. George did all of this for 3 years, living with Tex for months at a time because the eggs Tex kept laying were infertile. The man and bird would start out just after dawn. They'd go for a walk, and they'd dance, and they'd dance, and they'd dance, and they'd dance. George didn't enjoy any of this. He was miserable, actually. Miserable. But in the spring of 1983, Tex finally laid an egg that hatched, and George was right there when it did. He was invited on The Tonight Show to celebrate. One headline read, "Man, Crane, proud parents of chick." George named the chick Gee Whiz, and by now Gee Whiz has 44 grandchildren and great-grandchildren in the wild. There's more whooping cranes